Today, I'm here to tell you that the Western world is in danger. And it is endangered because those who are supposed to have to defend the values of the West are co-opted by a vision of the world that inexorably leads to socialism and thereby to poverty.
Day 3 at Davos, the president of Argentina shutting it down at the World Economic Forum. That and more on The Reading Room. The standout session for today was, in my opinion, the session with the president of Argentina, who pretty much told these socialists to go F themselves. I did a separate video to that because it was that good if you want to check that out. But pretty much this overshadowed all the other sessions. But we'll cover some of what I think is important for us to pay attention to. So today, the dark triad that wants to consolidate under this one world government represented today with Dr. Tedros from the WHO speaking about disease X, and then we had Mr. Gutierrez from the UN also drilling into our heads why we need this one world setup. Let's take a look at what Dr. Tedros had to say.
After we started putting a placeholder, the first that came was in the disease X is COVID. So we have experience now, and we are preparing based on that experience. A lot of assessment has been done by independent panels and experts. And based on the recommendation, many initiatives we have already started many initiatives. And then the other key, in order to have better prepared and to address the disease X, is the pandemic agreement. The pandemic agreement can bring all the experience, all the challenges that we have faced, and all the solutions into one. And that agreement can help us to prepare for the future in a better way, because this is about a common enemy. And without a shared response, starting from the preparedness, we will face the same problem as COVID. And deadline for the pandemic agreement is May 2024, and member states are negotiating. This is between countries, and I hope they will deliver this pandemic agreement by that time.
I can't express how serious this is. We should not be treated like lab rats. The first time around, they failed to exert this control that they're seeking. Let's not forget that they enforced restricting travel. We had lockdowns. Many, including many states here in the United States, had mandatory vaccines. Digital vaccine passports for some, mandatory masking when the science wasn't fully there. And let's not forget the social distancing, Fauci's new revelation of not really having any solid information behind that. Also, censorship of opposing science. Many people now who are so-called injured couldn't speak up about what they were experiencing because they were being censored. And then let's not forget the most important of all, loss of sovereign nation democracy. So what they are doing here is creating the problem, and we're seeing this in various instances. Then they offer the solution. In fact, they have a solution before there's even a problem, and then they gain this control. Do you honestly want Bill Gates and the rest of these crazy delusional control freaks to be in charge of your children's health while they simultaneously make money off of it? We need to make more noise. This is very serious, and they are hustling towards May 2024. Now, AstraZeneca was front and center as the pharmaceutical company representing there and working with the WHO. Now, in this session, the chairman does admit that the company didn't actually focus on vaccines, but when this crisis happened, well, I guess the humanity kicked in as well as the money that they could make from this. So here he is explaining him seizing this opportunity in the name of humanity, but I'll let you decide for yourself what you think.
The kind gentleman to my left, Michel Demer, who is the chairman of the board of AstraZeneca. I wonder if you'd like to give us your opening comments.
Yes, of course. I think what we can say, first of all, is that a good preparation for a crisis happens when there is no crisis. And so having a panel like this here is already a great start, because you have all the players of the healthcare ecosystem represented here, because at the end we have to all work together to try to address it. Now, as you said, I'm the chairman of AstraZeneca. That obviously has played a pretty special role during the COVID crisis, and I think we have a few lessons that we can share from this. Just as a reminder, we were not a vaccine company at the time. We just decided that this was a call for action, that we had to try to use our know-how and our networks to try to help. And so we signed a license agreement with the University of Oxford. We then put together a network of more than 20 contract manufacturing organizations to whom we transferred technology and skills to basically help building the vaccine, which is it's not like building a pill, it's much more complicated than that. And then finally, we managed to distribute more than 3 billion doses of vaccines at no profit, of which more or less 2/3 went to low and medium income countries, mainly through COVAX, which was obviously a very important organization at the time too.
So, just to give you some transparency, according to the World Health Organization's data set here on June 13, 2022, AstraZeneca's jab had an efficacy of 72%. So, you just heard him say that they weren't in the business of making vaccines, but I'm guessing once they saw the opportunity, they decided to jump on in there and shell out 3 billion doses to the poorest in the world. What does that tell you? How effective do you think that this was in the initial stages of the doses that they were giving out? So he says, oh, we weren't taking any type of profit. No, they weren't in the beginning. And, I think from an ethical standpoint, that would make sense since they were new to the game. But then in 2021, they ended up signing a contract, and the prediction for their revenue was about 2.5 billion. As you can see, they ended up overachieving their target in 2021. So what does that tell you? I mean, these people are so gross. God only knows how many injuries were caused as a result of this greed. Like, who in their right mind are going to trust these people again? This is a reason why they're so anxious to getting this pandemic accord in place.
What I think is important, if you draw the lessons from this experience, first of all, quick action, quick decision making, extremely important, but even more important, partnerships, and especially PPPs. You have heard me, we have partnered with academia, obviously with governments, with regulators, with third-party commercial contractors, and with NGOs. And it's only because of that we finally managed to distribute the largest dose, actually, of COVID vaccines during this crisis. So that is lessons learned, but I would say a spontaneous reaction, because the crisis was at the door when this happened. If you think back a little bit, say, oh, could we better prepare next time? We put a lot of emphasis nowadays on sustainability and resilience of health systems. We have seen that health systems were not prepared for that last time, not only to handle the sheer volume of COVID cases, but some examples, for instance, in the UK, it is estimated that 1 million cancer cases were not diagnosed during COVID, just because of lack of resources in the health system. So obviously that cannot happen. It is a transformation that will take a certain time, and I would have basically 3 recommendations for that. First of all, I think it's important that health become a strategic asset for every country. And it's not always the case, I can tell you that. We do that for energy, why not for health? Is there anything more important than the good health of your population? Because good health drives prosperity, drives work efficiency, and so economic growth. And so we have really to work on that. There's a McKinsey study that says that with good health, we could add $12 trillion to the global GDP by 2040.
I'm sorry, but all he's talking about is money. I get it. This is the economic forum, but when you're talking about good health, how about talking about people living longer? People like nipping diseases in the bud, people having less heart attacks, people having less strokes as a result of less stress. Focusing on the money aspect, he's seeing dollar signs by saying, well, we didn't get to diagnose the cancers because, there weren't enough resources. Okay, sure, but he's thinking we were missing out on that revenue too, as well. I think these people are so incredibly gross and they need to just stop because the people are not going to buy into this. I don't trust any of these people that are associated with this organization.
That is quite an impact if we work on it. So that is point one. The second is, it's not just about spending more, it's also spending smarter. And a shocking statistics, for instance, in OECD countries, the average spend on prevention is 3% of the budget of health systems. And obviously, if you spend so little on prevention, you end up spending the majority of your budget on hospitalization and on late treatments. So there's a lot of change that needs to happen there, and that can be extremely useful. And then the third one is obviously we have to build on technology, on data management, on artificial intelligence. I agree with you, there's a lot to do. We can start building across-the-board libraries of viruses, of vaccines, share our data with each other because it's quite important when it happens. And then artificial intelligence can also help a lot, not only in drug discovery, it's a lot of potential there, but also in the administration of health systems and trying to rationalize and to make sure that finally most of the budget is really spent for the primary care and for innovations rather than being always reactive.
It all sounds good, but from an American standpoint, we have to fix our system here first before we can jump on board with any global system or program. And also, in addition, Big Pharma here is probably one of the most corrupt industries that we have that needs to be sorted before we do any of this.
I think I should start from thanking AstraZeneca also.
Thank you.
What Michel said is correct. I think he asked, also said my friend to attest to it. Since I'm here, I hope I represent both of us. And AstraZeneca, the vaccine, has reached many developing and middle and low-income countries, and the volume he said, and we're very, very grateful. So we know that, and the technology transfer you have made with other countries to produce, and I think that really helped, and that could be a model for the future. So,
and there you have it, folks. You want to bet that AstraZeneca is going to be one of the so-called WHO partners in the pandemic treating network? Yeah, no, I'm going to pass on this. Moving on, let's talk about the United Nations speech. Listen to the language that they're using and tell me if you feel a little uneasy.
I believe this crisis is the direct result of a paradox facing our world. In the face of the serious, even existential threats posed by runaway climate chaos and the runaway development of artificial intelligence without guardrails.
Let me pause for a second. I want to point this out. You're going to start hearing this buzzword now around safety with using the word guardrails. Don't be fooled. This is just a replacement for more government regulation. You'll start to hear, oh, we need to protect our kids from the internet and place guardrails so, they can be protected and safe online. And they're doing this because they know very well that the mass majority of people don't like to know that the government is being forced into this public-private partnership, especially in democratic societies like the United States.
We seem powerless to act together. As climate breakdown begins, countries remain hell-bent on raising emissions. Our planet is still heading for a scorching 3-degree increase in global temperatures. Droughts, storms, fires, and floods are pummeling countries and communities. Before traveling to the United Nations climate talks in COP28 in Dubai, I saw for myself the dramatic receding of Himalayan glaciers and the accelerated melting of the ice sheet in Antarctica. And here in Switzerland, glaciers are disappearing before our eyes. Some are gone forever, and others have lost 10% of their volume in just the past 2 years.
And he says all of this knowing that he got to Davos on a private jet, most likely funded by donations and the American taxpayer, but hey, who's paying attention?
Such rapid changes should disturb us all. 2023 went down as the hottest year on record, but it could be one of the coolest years on the future. The media has recently reported that the US fossil fuel industry has launched yet another multi-billion-dollar campaign to kneecap progress and keep the oil and gas flowing indefinitely.
He's picking on the United States because we're trying to create jobs, but makes no mention of China and their offenses. Interesting.
Let me be very clear again. The phase-out of fossil fuels is essential and inevitable. No amount of spin or scare tactics will change that. Let's hope it doesn't come too late.
Oh, you mean the scare tactic that they tried by saying the world was supposed to have ended like 5 years ago? Come on, get the fuck out of here.
But we must now act to ensure a just and equitable transition to renewable energy. At the same time, every new iteration of generative AI increases the risk of serious unintended consequences. The technology has enormous potential for sustainable development, but as the International Monetary Fund has just warned us, it is very likely it will worsen inequality in the world. And some powerful tech companies are already pursuing profits with a clear disregard for human rights, personal privacy, and social impact. This is no secret. Now, these two issues, climate and AI, are exhaustively discussed by governments, by the media, and by leaders here in Davos. And yet, we have not yet an effective global strategy to deal with either. And the reason is simple. Geopolitical divides are preventing us from coming together around global solutions for global challenges. Little wonder that people everywhere are losing faith in governments, institutions, and financial and economic systems. Dear friends, at times of existential peril in the past, the world was able to come together to mitigate risks. Even during the Cold War, the world faced terrible regional conflicts, moments of great danger, but there were systems in place to promote predictability, including initiatives on arms control and nuclear hotlines.
In my opinion, I think the UN is afraid of losing power because more and more people are waking up to seeing the corruption that has been going on, as well as the human rights abuses that have been going on against women, especially in Africa. And with the perk of having immunity, none of these crimes that are being committed are brought to justice. And honestly, if we're going to be amending some of these international laws, then perhaps maybe we amend the immunity law and make them be held accountable for some of this activity. If we're talking about equity, then yeah, nobody should be above the law, in my opinion.
But now, some analysts predict we are moving into a totally chaotic situation in which geopolitical divides at all levels prevent any global response to global threats. But I strongly believe it is possible to prevent this disastrous scenario. I am confident we can build a new multipolar global order with new opportunities for leadership.
We can build a new multipolar global order with new opportunities for leadership.
Excuse me? Red flag, that screams authoritarianism, and it does sound like when he says new leadership opportunities. Oh, so what are you saying? We're going to have like a global king or a global monarch, president? Where are you going with this? The other question I have is, how did I fall asleep at the wheel here and not realize what has been going on over the last couple decades? I think it's time people need to wake up because this is being taken out from right under us and they have amassed so much power. The question becomes like, are we going to be able to turn this ship around and reclaim back our freedom? Because they are so close to taking it.
But multipolarity creates complexity. Left to itself, it could deepen fault lines between North and South, East and West, developed and developing economies, within the G20, and between the G20 and everyone else. And the only way to manage this complexity and avoid a slide into chaos is through a reformed, inclusive, networked multilateralism. Now, this requires strong multilateral institutions and frameworks and effective mechanisms of global governance. Without them, further fragmentation is inevitable and the consequences are clear. We see an epidemic of impunity around the world. We see some countries doing whatever it takes to further their own interests at all costs.
And of course, these people take no accountability for contributing to this chaos and disruption, but instead have to use the default by blaming Russia. So how about this, United Nations? Why don't we take a couple years off from being global and each country work on themselves? We all have work that we could be doing to improve, such as getting our infrastructure up, our healthcare systems, technology. And then once we're in a stable place, then we can come back together to talk about potential partnerships. But right now, I don't think it's good. And I think the more that they keep forcing us down this path, the more fractured we're going to be, in which there's going to be more chaos. What I don't like this guy doing is like saying, oh, we're going to make this decision and not take into any account the lives that are being affected, especially like around this whole climate change and the amount of jobs being lost as well as people suffering. So like, I'm not for this. I get that they want us to be all kumbaya, but we also need to preserve ourselves and we also need to preserve who we are and our identity. And this is not our identity.
From Russia's invasion of Ukraine to Sudan, more recently Gaza, parties to conflict are ignoring international law, trampling on the Geneva Conventions, and even violating the United Nations Charter.
Rendering the whole point of the UN irrelevant.
The world is standing by as civilians, mostly women and children, are killed, maimed, bombarded, forced from their homes, and denied access to humanitarian aid. I repeat my call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza and a process that leads to sustained peace for Israelis and Palestinians based on a two-state solution. That is the only way to stem the suffering and prevent a spillover that could send the entire region up in flames. And I also call for a just peace in Ukraine, a peace in accordance with the United Nations Charter, a peace in accordance with international law.
Or how about this? How about we stop the flow of money? Because a lot of what's going on is because the United States keeps funding it.
Dear friends, geopolitical divisions are a major risk factor affecting our faltering global economy. Political instability is adding to economic insecurity. Meanwhile, inequality and injustice are reaching obscene levels, a serious obstacle to sustainable development. Oxfam reports that the world's 5 richest men, and they are men, have more than doubled their fortune since 2020 at a rate of $14 million per hour.
So why not ask them to share the wealth instead of working directly with them? I mean, let's be real. They're talking out of both sides of their mouth. The very same people that have all this wealth are the very same people that are contributing to this mess. How much money is this guy making to give this speech? Because honestly, I can't imagine that he actually believes what he's saying.
At the same time, more than half the world, nearly 5 billion people, have become poorer. The World Bank warns we are heading towards the worst half-decade for growth in 30 years. And many of the some countries battered by climate chaos are in a financial shock hold. More than half the world's poorest 75 countries face debt distress. Their interest payments have quadrupled in recent years.
And this is the shining example of taking no accountability for the reason why things have gotten worse. All these SDG goals or Agenda 21 that was set out back in like 1992. I mean, you would think after so many decades, we'd be further along, but as a result of forcing all these different elements to affecting people's lives, they're not recognizing that, yes, you guys are the result for why people are poor, hungry, or why women are not getting the opportunities, as well as what we're seeing with conflict all around the world. This is your fault. Nah, don't blame us for being the one who screwed the world. This is on you.
After decades of reductions in poverty and hunger, progress has slowed and in some countries gone into reverse. And this is fueling resentment and anger. Dear friends, when global norms collapse, so does trust. And I'm personally shocked by the systematic undermining of principles and standards we used to take for granted. I'm outraged that so many countries and companies are pursuing their own narrow interests without any consideration for our shared future or our common goals.
This is sheer lunacy. Like, he's outraged that people are pursuing their own interests. Well, that's what freedom is about. And when you remove, especially the element of God in people's life, which nowhere in any of their charter or in the WEF on this agenda talks about the nuclear family and how to improve lives, as opposed to talking about a shared commitment. Like, I didn't agree to this, and I'm sure that many of you listening to this didn't agree to it either. Do you want to be a slave? I don't. So, I'm not understanding why he's so outraged. Is it because we don't want to buy into this slavery? Don't be offended, but yeah, that's not the life that I am choosing to live, Gutierrez.
And I'm certain that unless we take action, we can expect much, much worse. So let's be clear, rebuilding trust is not a slogan or a PR campaign. It requires deep reforms to global governance to manage geopolitical tensions during a new era of multipolarity. And it is essential to building a safer, more stable and prosperous world. So, dear friends, the institutions and frameworks of global governance, from the Security Council to the Bretton Woods system, were created 80 years ago.
Okay, but it was working. Maybe they need to take a little bit of time out to work on themselves to get back who they were, because this organization is not the organization of what it was 80 years ago when it started. This is how you're going to build back trust, not just telling us that we have to trust you, because we have no reason to trust you at this point. And the same goes to our leaders and the media who have done this to us.
And the Global Digital Compact can turbocharge the SDGs and help to close the digital connectivity gap, share data, and build digital public goods. The private sector is in the lead on AI expertise and resources. And you need the private sector's full engagement in our multi-stakeholder effort to develop a governance model that is networked and adaptive. I believe the UN should play a central convening role. The advisory board I created on artificial intelligence has already made preliminary recommendations on AI governance that tap the benefits of this incredible new technology while mitigating its risks. And we need governments urgently to work with tech companies on risk management frameworks for current AI development and on monitoring and mitigating future harms. And we need systematic effort to increase access to AI so that developing economies can benefit from its enormous potential. We need to bridge the digital divide instead of deepening it. Rebuilding trust will not happen overnight, but I'm convinced that it's both essential and possible. And I urge everybody, I urge you to influence, to prevent further damage, and to get our world back on track to safety, to prosperity, and peace. And I thank you.
You hear the direction loud and clear. And they're going to go into overdrive because they are panicking as a result of the U.S. election coming up. Because they know, let's say there is a change in our administration, God willing, this whole thing is going to come crashing down. It's kind of incredible that, like, for the last 7 years, we've seen the media as well as these governing elites, so-called, preach about democracy. But then you realize after some of the events that unfolded last year that these were the same people who were actually undermining it. As they have been reiterating throughout this week, the biggest threat to this whole plan from succeeding is because of misinformation, disinformation. But what it really boils down to is that they lost control of the narrative because they lost control of the media. And that's where this all went sideways. People started to see and hear about the truth, not the lies that we've been fed. For whatever reason, these people have a serious issue with stability in the nuclear family. And God forbid there is a candidate out there that is promoting that. Here in this session that they held today around freedom of expression, listen to the take of what this speaker says.
So this year, 4.2 billion people will be eligible to vote in national elections around the world. Now, if those elections are free and fair, it's a very important expression of the people's will. But far too often, the votes and our voices are undermined by creeping authoritarianism. That's where power is concentrated and applied just to favour a few. It's the difference between the rule of law, where laws apply to everyone equally, and rule by law, where the rules are used as an instrument of control. The warning signs, however, appear well before anyone starts their journey to the ballot box. Politicians intent on grabbing power have the same playbook. And it starts with concepts that seem quite harmless. It's concepts like protecting family values or safeguarding our traditions. But pay close attention to these concepts because they are often self-serving, manipulative, and they almost always harm people and restrict human rights. One example of this is how politicians demonize LGBT rights and identity. They created a mystery around it, somehow projecting that it undermines family and is corrupting children. And we have seen this in many countries, from Colombia to the United States.
I'm going to stop right here. What is so wrong about pushing family values? Is it because that gives the family, especially the parents, back control of their children? I'm sorry, but what we're seeing happening to our youth in this whole identity crisis that they're throwing onto them is actually hurting the country. Now, today, I'm going to share something that I found when I was watching some of the congressional hearings. This is from today regarding the migrant invasion that we have going on here in the United States.
Mr. Beer, you noticed, and you noted in your opening and in several times throughout this hearing, that U.S. job openings are at record highs, correct?
That's right.
And have we been able to have a consistent level of among our current citizenship to be able to fill those job openings?
Oh, absolutely not. U.S. population growth right now is at the lowest in its entire history.
Yes, U.S. population growth is at the lowest in our entire history, and we've seen comparatively when other countries in similar circumstances, low population growth, but also when they pass very anti-immigrant or just make it very difficult to welcome immigrants legally.
Now I'm going to stop the clip right here because AOC is one of the most ignorant people working in our government at the moment. She is all for this migrant invasion because in her eyes, she's saying, well, look, we have all these jobs that are not being filled. But she's not asking the one important question, and that is, why is it that the American population is not growing? Why are we at its lowest? Could it be the woke policies and ideology that has been rooted, destroying our society? She's so stupid that she's failing to see that this whole empowerment movement around trans rights and women's rights is all designed to keep them from having families. So confuse these kids early on, mess up their systems, and allow them to get these hormonal and sex changes because we need to respect their identity as opposed to helping them be comfortable in who they are. This whole diversity, equity, inclusion, by design, is set up to destroy society. This is why we have people not being able to get along with one another, not wanting to get married, not wanting to be rooted in the family structure. And this is what we need to get back to.
Political leaders intent on consolidating power don't stop there. Civil society. And by that, I'm talking about independent groups and activists, advocates who protect rights and free societies. We're talking about institutions like the free press, courts. These have become the new battlegrounds for autocratic leaders looking to eliminate scrutiny on their decisions and their actions. There is the United States, where state legislatures and courts have weakened laws aimed at removing race-based restrictions on voting to a point that they're basically irrelevant today.
They want to keep racism alive. I mean, they think it's bad that they're taking off the ballot what race you are. Why is that relevant?
In Florida and other United States, in other states in the US, we have seen educational censorship, limiting students' abilities to learn about sexual and gender identity, as well as the history of slavery and racism. And politicians know that accurate information on these issues is just one factor that inspires people to participate in civic action and hold authorities to account.
These people are so mental.
And governments are increasingly using technology platforms to silence critics and censor dissent, especially in countries that don't have robust independent judiciaries and oversight. Governments, we've seen, can implement laws that essentially become traps for critics. All governments should redouble efforts with friends and enemies alike to uplift institutions, to protect civic space wherever we see the threats to independent civic space and institutions, and any ability that we have to hold those in power to account. We all have a role to play in fighting for human rights, because protecting everyone's dignity gives the roadmap to build thriving and inclusive societies.
Now you can tell she didn't believe one word of that. She could barely stop looking at her tablet without stumbling. I don't know what planet they're rocking to, but they're certainly not with the majority. But what do you guys think? In a perfect world, all of this sounds wonderful, but we all know that the people that are involved more than likely are doing this for selfish reasons and are extremely corrupt. We know quite a few characters in the political sphere that you shouldn't trust. What I do think, though, is that should there be a shift and a pushback and the people have more of a voice and more feeling or a sense of control and being able to maintain their personal sovereignty, then there could be some type of give and take. But in this situation, with this organization, they are making decisions for you. And I'm not sure how you feel about that, but for me, I do not comply, and I will not comply. It really does fall on each of us to take responsibility to learn about what's going on and decide for ourselves if this is the future that we want. But until then, I do hope that you do come back and join me on this journey of learning what is really going on so we can make these decisions and make the right ones. But if you like this video, please do not forget to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe, because I will be dropping more videos pertaining to this Davos annual meeting and uncovering what it's really all about, and you definitely don't want to miss it. But until then, I ask you please be safe, and I'll see you soon.